Thank you so
Thank you
much for joining
me.
us. Your character on The Affair is dealing with a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
For those who haven't seen the show, can you talk about his situation?
Sure. So when we meet that character, those characters in the beginning of season 1, he and his wife are dealing with the loss of their child. So really no more traumatic thing, I think, that a couple or any human being could go through. And then over the course of that first season, as you said, she engages in this extramarital affair, which then is exposed towards the end of the first season. And so each one of them, and Cole, has to deal with the fallout in their own lives, the sort of repercussions and implications of all of those choices that get made. And then particularly for Cole and Allison, because there is this massive loss between the two of them, they still have yet to really properly grapple with the loss of their child. And that animates so much of what they do with and to each other.
That is some deep sorrow.
Yeah.
Massive loss, and then this infidelity. How do you channel that as an actor?
Well, you can't, to a certain extent. I don't think that I would give myself credit to, and I frankly hope I never do, know what it feels like to lose a child. I just feel that that's such a particular space that the people, or to lose a child young, I guess, even more so, because you violate the compact that you have with that baby of being the protector and nurturer. So I'm not going to give myself that credit, but trauma and loss and the dissolution of families, that's something that I've gone through in my life, and I've certainly witnessed it or with people around me. And so you just try to pull from personal experiences and the things that you have seen or done or experienced and repackage those and put those on camera.
Is it hard going there so much for a role like this?
Yeah. Partially, I would say that last year Ruth really had to do the heavy lifting. Cole was more of a peripheral character in the first season, and by virtue of the way that the narrative is broken into two pieces, and since he and Helen were more specifically in their partners' lives, I had more time, right? There was more space in between to be able to grapple with the difficulties. Ruth, I mean, they put her through the ringer. That was
Helen is Dominic's wife, by the way.
Yeah, Helen is Dominic's wife, played by Maura Tierney, and Ruth is my wife, Allison. And she paid a price for last season. That was a tough year for her.
What do you do to be able to go there so often and do that difficult work?
Well, a lot of it is comfort and trust, frankly, because you are exposing yourself in ways that are deeply uncomfortable and unnatural. We spend almost all of our personal lives protecting ourselves against that sort of emotional exposure amongst strangers or even amongst our intimates, right? We are constantly putting on different masks and figuring out how to shade our actions and behaviors to be accepting or acceptable to the social group that we're in. So it starts from that trust, right? And frankly, having a group of very, very good actors helps a lot, but we all personality-wise, just sort of luck of the Irish, we all personality-wise really get along. So we feel like we're pulling in the same direction. And then, the next major portion of that is putting yourself in the hands of a director that you trust. I mean, eventually it goes into the editor and the writers are there, but to be in that space, you have to have a sort of because it's so vulnerable. Yeah, you have to have. Yeah, it's because you exactly. You have to have this instantly intimate relationship with the director, because it's so vulnerable and because you are saying real things, right? You can't deny. It came out of you from someplace, right? So even though it's in character, there's a part of you that's being expressed.
You've joked in the past that people in a relationship should be in a good place before they start watching this show. What kind of emotional reactions have you seen or heard?
Well, it has been. I mean, they're intense ones. It's an interesting show because some of my friends will watch the show together, which I'm amazed by, frankly, because it does put you into so many deeply uncomfortable places. I find it hard to watch with Diane, frankly. I have friends who will watch it separately and then discuss it afterwards because that's a little bit less dangerous. And then the gamut of reactions that I have come across, that have come up to me, frankly, and from I hate your show, it's ruining my life, because my wife now every Sunday night wants to have a discussion about how flawed or broken we are, or that thing that time happened and what's up, Or frankly, people who are like, you know what, this is my moment of catharsis every week to just like to have a place to frame these things that I don't quite know how to describe myself, and I come here and watch them on Sundays.
I did watch it by myself, not with my partner. You said it's hard for you to watch it with your partner. So what kind of space, I mean, you said a viewer has to be in a good place in their relationship. What about as an actor? What kind of place do you need to be in?
To watch?
To perform.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know that you need to be emotionally or psychologically in a healthy space to perform, but I do know, at least for me, and I think it's different for everybody else, I do need to be in a comfortable space to be able to go to these places. There are different spaces for different roles, but this one requires that it requires you have simultaneously a vulnerability and a bravery to go there, right? You have to strip away all of the normal shielding that you have, and then you have to just sit in some pretty bleak spots. There's
a lot of questioning of monogamy going on right now in the world. The Affair shows the ripple effect of infidelity. Do you see it as a kind of cautionary tale?
I see it as it certainly has become that. I'm not sure that it was intended to be that in the beginning. I see it as a cautionary tale, but I also see it as an examination of the damage that we can do to each other as individuals, but also the damage that we do to each other from a sort of societal level. We have, in many ways, in my opinion, created institutions and dynamics that are almost specifically created to make people unhappy.
What do you mean?
Well, so here's a show examining the fallout of infidelity. And it's also examining the ways in which humans can damage each other, sometimes quite often without even the intention of it. So we're 7,000 or 8,000 years into human coupling, conscious human coupling, and yet we have still these institutions that are built around publicly shaming people when there is infidelity, basing an entire life's choice around the institution of marriage being inviolable to a degree that literally from day one to day two, it can go from this is the center of my entire life, it's how I'm going to raise my children and create a safe environment for us going forward, to it's all over, I never want to talk to you again. Yeah. I think that's absurd, frankly.
Like high stakes.
It's high stakes, but it's high stakes because the cultural expectation, and that this is a lot of the reaction to the show, people are outraged that we would present cheaters in a positive life. Right?
Yeah.
That they had made a choice that is absolutely difficult and it's destructive, but they made a choice for themselves. Their partners weren't evil, right? We didn't even let them off the hook that way. They're at the center of the show, and there are repercussions. But isn't it a little crazy that they're evil for making a choice that makes them happy?
I mean, these are the questions that as a society we're wrestling with right now.
I think so, yeah.
Have you always had your thoughts clear on these sorts of things?
No, I mean, look, I'm 10 years into a relationship. I'm processing this stuff too. And it's not just about, interpersonal relationships. It's also the dynamics between, frankly, capitalism and the individual, right? I think we create institutions that are supposed to, it's weird if we are a society that wants to say that monogamy is the most important thing, that everything we try to sell to each other, and that's what it is based around sex.
Yeah, and individualism.
And individualism, exactly. And that your path is right and righteous at all times, except for it doesn't fit into this mold of this other thing that you will be judged harshly for if you don't live up to the expectations.
It is a strange incompatibility, right? Our society is so based on individualism. We sell everything with sex. Yeah. And then at the same time, we still see marriage as a high value.
As a high value and core and if not a core institution at the center of a functioning society. And those two things are incompatible, right? There's a cognitive dissonance between those that we are struggling with right now.
Yeah.
And are your parents still together?
They are.
Okay, so my parents are not still together, and they're part of, the last generation who is trying to, like the love generation, trying to figure this out and having too many choices, frankly, too many options in life. And so now I feel like our generation we don't want that, but we don't want to go back to before that, like the Beaver Cleaver world, right? That's not really an option on the table. And so I think we're grappling right now with how humans can be together happily.
Yeah. It's interesting. I find people of our generation, we have these sophisticated ideas and this understanding of what's going on. At the same time, we're so drawn to that monogamous ideal. Still, you're in a relationship for 10 years.
Sure.
I'm in a long-term relationship.
Well, we're drawn to the monogamous ideal, and this is something I wouldn't have known before this, but there is something so deeply satisfying about sharing your story intimately with another person. Like my life is wrapped up in this relationship. It would be like losing a piece of myself at this point, a significant piece of myself at this point to separate from Diane. Yeah. And I recognize that, stripping aside all the cultural necessities of it, I recognize that in an organic way that I wouldn't have got in my early 20s. At the same time, I do also think that we are creatures of our environment. So as much as I like to think that I have free will and I'm making this choice of my own volition, I won't use my mother as an example because she'll kick my teeth in. But I think that we are throughout our lives the products of the environment that we're raised in. And if we're raised around in a culture that tells us that this is what normal looks like, this is what healthy is, this is what you're supposed to aspire to, I think a lot of us subconsciously find a way to manifest that in our reality.
And it is difficult at that point to untangle what is cultural and what is in fact a value that you want to pursue
in your own life individually. And at a certain point, I'm not sure that there's purpose in doing that. Because the situation is self-evident, right? So wherever it came from, it might not actually be all that important to know where it came from, but we need to figure out, now that we're here, how best to do it.
Okay, we're going to keep trying to untangle these things. Just for people tuning in right now, you're listening to Q. I'm Shad, and I'm speaking with actor Joshua Jackson. He stars in a new hit TV show called The Affair. I want to ask you about your career in acting. You started acting at a young age. Many actors that start at a young age have a really tough time. You managed to successfully transition in your career. What have been the keys to successfully making that transition?
Well, some of it was being not too successful too soon, because it is a lot to deal with at that age. I mean, being 13 is a lot to deal with, period. So I feel like I got a first taste of what success in this industry would look like with the Mighty Ducks movies, so that when Dawson's Creek happened, I was a little bit more prepared for the storm that was coming. So
you lucked out a little bit just in terms of your trajectory and success.
Yeah. I think if Dawson's had have been my first job, I think it would have been nearly impossible for me to process everything that goes on around that. Two, and this is not a possibility for young actors, I'm in the pre-social media days, and that is a big deal, because it's not like I didn't screw up in the ways that we now publicize everybody screwing up. I absolutely did. I just had the grace to have that happen in my private life and learn from those mistakes rather than be tarred with that for the rest of my life.
Massive shift.
Massive shift, and I missed it by, literally by a year or two. Just unbelievable. Squeaked out.
Wised up at exactly the right time.
Well, yeah,
and you were born at exactly
I was
the right
born at exactly, like 78 turns out, good year. And then I think I really love, really passionately enjoy the process of acting still after all these years. And so I think part of because it's not like I've just simply gone from strength to strength and everything has laid itself out perfectly over the course of my career, but through those times of frustration and through those, and I would say moments of self-doubt, but sometimes you're talking about years of self-doubt, the animating factor to keep me going inside of this business was that the process is enjoyable to me, right? The actual nitty-gritty, the sausage making.
Your love for acting is true.
It's true. Yeah. And the the peripheral stuff, I've seen and done some amazing things by virtue of being a famous person. They're great, and they're part of my life history, and that's fantastic. But it's not the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning.
Were there any pivotal people for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's really lots of them, frankly. And a big one goes all the way back to the Mighty Ducks era. Having Emilio Estevez on that set, because I was so young and so green, to be working with somebody, on a day-to-day basis who was good and a decent man, which helped a lot, and willing to, because he saw that I wanted to be good, that I wanted to try, was willing to be like, okay, so here's some I'd never heard the word before. Here's some technique. Like, here's how you would actually portray that thing that you want to be doing in this scene. You're like, oh my God, that's amazing. So, you know, he's a big one. The working with John Noble on Fringe, that was a big one. I did a play with Patrick Stewart. That was actually a massively important like moment in my personal development.
Why was that so important for you?
Well, when I finished with Dawson's, so I'd gone into Dawson's 19 years old, and came off that show at 24. So some pretty important developmental years of my life. It was exhausting. 24 episodes a year. You are running so hard, so fast. You're doing 9, 10 pages of work a day, and to be frank, not all of it very good. Right? There were at 24 episodes. There's a lot of filler in there, and it's a tough space to work in.
That makes the grind even harder.
It makes the grind even harder because there's nothing really left to sink your teeth into, right? And that also was a very good group of actors, so we enjoyed the performing with each other, but it got hard towards the end. And because I was so in the habit of working, when Dawson's finished, I went immediately, and then the year after did 4 movies back to back to back to back, which was stupid because I didn't have anything left to say at that point because I was just emptied out. And maybe I was kind of trying to avoid that fact, and I hit the first time where it would have been my choice to stop acting, and had the commitment to go and do this play, and felt that fear that is so important to what I do for a living, and then went through that process with Patrick every night, and over the course of the whatever it was 4 or 5 months of doing that play, was reminded of like, oh yeah, no, there's some stuff here that is deeply satisfying to me. That's
so important when you hit that wall.
Yeah.
To go through a challenge like that.
Precisely. That's exactly right. Through a challenge and something a little terrifying.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'd like to give myself the credit that I sort of inorganically knew that there was some part of my subconscious that was pushing me in that direction.
That's possible.
Which is possible. Or I just got very, very lucky. But either way, it got me to that place that I needed to be right at that moment.
You brought up the social media era that we live in now.
Mm-hmm.
You were lucky you didn't live in that era as
Yes,
a young
I
guy,
was.
but you live in that era now, and you're active
on
social media. How do you feel about that?
Well, I do feel like the opportunity to cut through the clutter is a good one. The ability to speak directly to something, I think, is a good one. I guess it's for the best, but I find the character limit on Twitter to be quite reductive. And I still, in the same way I find Instagram quite reductive. It's all reductive because we have the pretense that this social media actually connects us in a real way, like you and I are connecting person to person right now. I don't think that's true. I don't think I think it's a facsimile of yourself, or it's a moment of yourself that is getting transmitted, and there's a danger between there's a danger, I think, in confusing the two.
Between your real self and your online self.
Because your real self is whole. Right?
I think our generation, we understand, our generation older understands that there's a difference.
Right.
But I do, as most people do, worry about the younger generation who have just grown up with this stuff and can easily conflate the two.
And seem, a friend of mine just had her daughter just had her bat mitzvah. And they do the family videos, and I've been in each one of these family videos, and so I've seen all of her kids grow up. And the difference between the son and this daughter is that when we did the video, I'm not sure she looked up from the screen for more than 15 or 20 seconds, could not have been any less interested in any of the humans in the room, and was in this space, and yet was in a deeply emotionally engaged conversation via text and Twitter with a group of friends of hers that she would have much rather been spending her time with, and she made that clear. And I do think that that's dangerous. I think that there's an amazing opportunity for connectivity, and I think that's a huge leap forward, but I don't think we should confuse the sort of the surface level connectivity that social media or any sort of internet-based interaction, impersonal interaction allows you, and the value of this.
Real intimacy,
yeah.
You've shared political views on social media on the recent Canadian election, Planned Parenthood situation in the United States. Do you ever worry about alienating fans, putting your positions out there?
I know that is a concern, and truthfully, my opinions are much more strident than anything I've ever put on the internet. So I guess I do. edit myself a little bit, but in the same way that your mother always told you to. You know, like you can have an opinion, but you don't need to be popping off all the time. And I would stand behind any one of the things that I believe. So I guess I'm not too worried about it. I'm not too worried about that. Nice. I'm not sure, like, I'm not sure that in the modern world that those two things are quite as cut and dried as they used to be. I mean, everybody likes to tell actors, like, shut up and say the words, basically. I don't want to hear your opinions. I don't need to know what you're thinking. And I get there's still a sort of an impression that we must all be dingbats to wear makeup for a living. But we have the opportunity in the mouthpiece, and I think it's
more accepted now. There's
accepted.
Almost a level of expectation that people are going to know you a little bit more nowadays.
Well, that's certainly true. And that, okay, so having nothing to do with social media, but this is something that has existed from the beginning of the studio system. And I think there's a real trap here for actors that while every once in a while I feel like I need to voice my opinion on something, and there is the opportunity in social media to do that directly and have it not be intermediated, it makes your job harder as an actor the more people ascribe things to you, the more people think they know about you. Right?
How so?
If you have an opinion of me, if I am X, Y, or Z, Tom Cruise can really at this point only be Tom Cruise in movies. Because people have already, they know Tom Cruise, right?
Yeah,
he's that crazy guy, and he's always macho, and he's brave, and he's always going to get the girl and save the day, and blah, blah, blah. He can't break out of that now. Now, it's worked out pretty well for him, but I think that there's a real trap there for actors. Like if you, to become overexposed in that way, that there's a false sense of intimacy then with the people who would be trying to take in your performance, to the point that it takes them a second to stop seeing you and start seeing the character.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. They just see this false narrative or whatever narrative happens to be out there.
It happens in my family. It happens with my friends, right? For a lot of my friends, it's very hard for them to watch me work because they're like, it takes me a long time to stop hearing and seeing you and wondering why you're BSing and doing all this other stuff before I can get into the narrative.
I wish we could talk for longer, but we have to wrap up pretty soon. I want to ask you about New York.
Okay.
Off-Broadway debut in January for you. What can you tell us about the show?
Well, it's called Smart People. It's written by a woman named Lydia Diamond. And even though this isn't going to sound funny, it is a lightly comic take on race relations and privilege, really right now, even though it's set on the eve or around the events of Obama's first election.
Sounds great.
Yeah. I mean, I hope so. It's a new play, so it hasn't been done. So, there's nothing to judge it against. I'm very, very excited for the opportunity to do it. And, speaking of zeitgeist or things that are in the thought, like these are issues that are very, very present, like front of mind in it's probably less so up here. I mean, it's really front of mind in the States right now.
But it's
here too.
It's here too. These things are all over the place. I mean, all these things we've talked about today, from social media to relationship, everything. All this stuff is top of mind. Thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure.